More than 5,000 years ago, when much of the world was still living in small villages, a civilization rose along a river in the desert. A civilization with giant stone pyramids, powerful god kings, advanced medicine and engineering and writing, laws and mathematics. This was ancient Egypt. And even today, it still feels impossible. Egypt did not begin with kings. It did not begin with pyramids. It did not even begin with cities. Egypt began with a river. In the middle of a vast, deadly desert, there is a single green line that cuts across the land like a miracle. This is the River Nile. Without it, Egypt would be nothing but sand, heat, and death. But because of it, one of the greatest civilizations in human history was born. Every year, like clockwork, the Nile would flood its banks. To the ancient Egyptians, this was not a disaster. It was a gift from the gods. When the waters finally went down, they left behind rich black soil, some of the most fertile soil in the entire ancient world. The Egyptians even had a name for it. They called their land Kemet, meaning the black land, because of this dark, life-giving earth. And with this soil, they grew their food. They planted wheat, which became their bread. They planted barley, which became their beer. They planted flax, which became their clothes. The Nile turned desert into farmland, but the river did more than feed Egypt. It connected Egypt. In a world with no roads, no trucks, and no engines, the Nile became Egypt's great highway. Boats carried people, stone blocks, food, soldiers, and messages from the south to the north. The current flowed one way. The wind blew the other. This meant Egyptians could travel up and down the country with ease, something almost no other ancient civilization could do. The Nile was also their marketplace. Fish came from its waters. Papyrus plants grew on its banks and were turned into paper boats, baskets, and rope. Crocodiles, birds, and hippos became part of Egyptian life, stories, and religion. The river was everywhere. It shaped their economy, religion, politics, and even their imagination. To the Egyptians, the Nile was not just water, it was life itself. They believed the god Hapi controlled the flood. If the flood was good, Egypt would prosper. If it failed, famine would come. So they prayed, they built temples, they thanked the gods. And slowly, over centuries, villages grew into towns, towns grew into cities, and cities grew into a kingdom. This is why the Greek historian Herodotus later said, Egypt is the gift of the Nile. And he was right, because without the Nile, there would be no farms, no cities, no pyramids, no pharaohs, and no ancient Egypt. In most ancient societies, a king was just a man. In Egypt, a king was a god. The ruler of Egypt was called Pharaoh. But Pharaoh was not simply a political leader. He was believed to be the living form of the god Horus on earth, a bridge between the heavens and humanity. To the Egyptian people, Pharaoh did not just rule the land. He was the land. His word was law. His command was destiny. His existence kept the universe in balance. The Egyptians called this balance Mat, the sacred order of the world, and it was Pharaoh's job to protect it. Thousands of years ago, Egypt was not one country. It was two, Upper Egypt in the south, Lower Egypt in the north. They had different crowns, different symbols, and different rulers. But around 3100 BC, one king changed everything. A legendary ruler often called Narmer, also known as Menes, united the two lands into one kingdom. He wore two crowns in one, and with that single act, the Egyptian state was born. For the first time in history, one of the world's earliest central governments existed. From this moment on, Egypt would be ruled by a line of god kings that would last for over 3,000 years. The power of Pharaoh was absolute. Everything belonged to him. The land, the water, the harvest, the gold, the army, and the people. Officials did not govern in their own name. They governed in the name of Pharaoh. Taxes were collected for Pharaoh. Armies fought for Pharaoh. Monuments were built for Pharaoh. Even the gods were honored through Pharaoh. When a Pharaoh walked through the streets, people did not look him in the eyes. They bowed. They knelt. They believed they were standing in the presence of a living god. But ruling Egypt was not just about power. It was also about duty. Pharaoh was expected to keep the Nile flooding on time, keep enemies away, keep the gods satisfied, and keep order in the world. If famine came, it was Pharaoh's failure. If chaos came, it was Pharaoh's fault. This is why the earliest pharaohs built great temples, great tombs, and great monuments, not just to show power, but to prove they were chosen by the gods. And from these first god kings would come the age of pyramids. Then came the pyramids, not palaces, not temples, but mountains of stone built by human hands. Even today, thousands of years later, they still make us stop and ask one question: how is this possible? On the edge of the desert, near the Nile, rises the greatest of them all, the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was built more than 4,500 years ago. And for over 3,800 years, it was the tallest structure on Earth. The pyramid was built using more than 2 million stone blocks. Each block weighed between 2 and 15 tons. Some stones came from quarries hundreds of kilometers away. There were no engines, no cranes, no steel tools, no computers, and yet the pyramid is aligned to the 4 directions of the Earth with almost perfect accuracy. The stones fit together so tightly that even today you cannot slide a blade between them. It is more precise than many modern buildings. So how did they do it? The answer is even more impressive than any myth. These pyramids were not built by slaves. They were built by trained, paid professional workers. Archaeologists have found their homes, their bakeries, their tools, and even their graves. These workers were stonecutters, engineers, surveyors, transport crews, and master builders, tens of thousands of them. They worked in organized teams. They were fed with bread, fish, meat, and beer. This was a national project, a sacred mission. The pyramid was not just a tomb, it was a stairway to the sky. A machine designed to help the pharaoh's soul rise to the gods. Every stone had a religious purpose. Every measurement had a meaning. The entire structure was built to last forever. And somehow, it did. Even after earthquakes, storms, and thousands of years of erosion, the Great Pyramid still stands. Not because it was magic, but because it was built with genius, organization, mathematics, and human determination. It is not a mystery of aliens. It is a miracle of human civilization. And the pyramids were only the beginning. To the ancient Egyptians, death was not the end. It was only the beginning of another journey. They believed every human being was made of 3 parts: the Ka, the life force, the Ba, the personality, and the body, the physical form. For a person to live forever, all 3 had to survive. And that is why the Egyptians became the greatest masters of preserving the dead the world has ever known. When someone died, priests began a sacred process called mummification. The body was carefully washed, emptied of organs, dried with salt, and wrapped in hundreds of meters of linen. This process took 70 days, not for beauty, but for eternity. Because the Egyptians believed the soul would one day return to the body, and if the body was gone, the soul would be lost forever. But mummification was only the beginning. The dead person would now face the most important trial of all, the judgment of Osiris. In the underworld, the heart of the dead was placed on a scale. On the other side of the scale was the feather of Ma'at, the symbol of truth and justice. If the heart was heavier than the feather, it meant the person had lived a bad life, and their soul would be destroyed forever. But if the heart was pure, they would be allowed to enter the field of reeds, a perfect version of Egypt where life continued forever. That is why tombs were filled with food, furniture, clothes, jewelry, and even games, because the next life was believed to be very much like this one. The rich were buried in great tombs and pyramids. The poor were buried in simple graves. But everyone, rich or poor, hoped for the same thing: eternal life. And above all the gods of Egypt stood one ruler of the dead, Osiris, the god who himself had died and been reborn. His story gave Egyptians hope. That death could be defeated. That time could be beaten. That life could continue forever. And this belief built the pyramids, built the tombs, built the temples, and shaped Egyptian civilization for over 3,000 years. When we think of ancient Egypt, we think of pyramids, gods, and kings. But most Egyptians were not kings. They were ordinary people, farmers, builders, craftsmen, fishermen, scribes. And it was their daily work that kept the empire alive. Most Egyptians lived in simple mud brick houses. Their furniture was basic. Their lives were hard, but they were not miserable. They had families, music, games, festivals, and stories. The heart of Egyptian life was the Nile. When the river flooded, farmers planted their crops. When it went down, they harvested. Their main foods were bread, beer, onions, dates. Fish meat was rare for the poor, but common during festivals. Children did not go to school like today. Most learned their parents' jobs, but a few lucky boys were trained as scribes. Scribes were the educated class. They could read and write hieroglyphs. They kept records. They wrote laws. They worked for temples and the government. And because writing was rare, scribes were very powerful. Egyptian women had more rights than many women in other ancient civilizations. They could own property, run businesses, go to court, and inherit wealth. They also worked as weavers, musicians, doctors, and priests. Doctors in Egypt were surprisingly advanced. They could set broken bones, treat wounds, perform surgery, and prescribe medicine. They even had medical books. Egyptians also cared about appearance. Both men and women wore makeup, perfume, jewelry, not just for beauty, but to protect themselves from the sun and disease. Life in Egypt was not easy, but it was organized, stable, and predictable. And because of that stability, Egyptian civilization lasted longer than almost any other in history. No civilization, no matter how powerful, lasts forever. For more than 3,000 years, Egypt had been one of the greatest powers on earth. Its temples stood like mountains. Its kings were treated like gods. Its culture seemed eternal. But slowly, the cracks began to appear. As centuries passed, Egypt grew weaker. Some pharaohs were strong, others were not. There were civil wars, corrupt officials, and fights for the throne. The great central government began to break apart. At the same time, new enemies were rising beyond Egypt's borders. The Assyrians invaded first. Then came the Persians. Later, Egypt was conquered by Alexander the Great, and after him, Egypt fell under Greek rule. The pharaohs were no longer truly Egyptian. They were foreigners wearing Egyptian crowns. The last chapter came with one of history's most famous queens, Cleopatra. She tried to restore Egypt's independence. She failed. In 30 BC, Egypt was conquered by Rome, and the land of the pharaohs became a Roman province. The old gods were forgotten. The temples were closed. The ancient writing, hieroglyphs, was eventually lost, and the voice of ancient Egypt fell silent. But Egypt did not truly die. Its monuments survived. Its pyramids still stood, sleeping in the sand, waiting. Thousands of years later, the world would rediscover them and remember that once along the Nile, human beings built a civilization that touched eternity.